Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. Some say it never happened. Others claim it happened so completely that nothing remains to prove it did. The 11th Black Crusade, if it existed at all, is a name whispered by madmen, muttered by dying astropaths, or scratched into the walls of derelict void ships found adrift with no crew and no memory. Amidst a universe where every atrocity is etched in blood and marble, one must ask, why would one crusade among 13 be erased? Why would Abaddon's infamous path of destruction leap from the 10th to the 12th without a trace? There's a peculiar chill when one looks at that empty space in the timeline. The Imperium is not known for subtlety, nor is it keen on admitting ignorance. And yet, here, there is only void. A silence that screams. It is not merely an absence of records, but a void in psychic resonance. A coldness in the warp where one would expect heat and rage. This is the wound of something that was forcibly forgotten, not merely lost. Something so dire, so unthinkable, that even the entities of chaos are hesitant to name it. Whatever truth lies buried behind the veil of this phantom crusade, it was not erased by accident. It was buried, intentionally, violently, and completely. And what kind of war is so terrible that both gods and men collude to forget it? The Eye of Terror never sleeps. It seethes, churns, and writhes with the malice of 1,000 damned realities bleeding into one. It is a wound in the fabric of the universe, a place where time coils like a serpent and cause does not always follow effect. In the millennia between the 10th and 12th Black Crusades, there was a strange agitation within the Eye. Warp tides surged unpredictably. Demonic entities, usually content to war among themselves in the realm of chaos, began to manifest in reality with unprecedented hunger. Imperial psychers reported nightmares of vast, blood-slicked battlefields upon which unknown standards burned, crowned not with Abaddon's mark, but with something older, darker. Those who watched the Eye, from the Scholastica Psychana to the hidden seers of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, recorded fluctuations that defied known precedent. Entire fleets patrolling near the Cadian Gate were swallowed by sudden, unexplainable warp rifts. Exploratory Mechanicus probes launched into the edge of the Eye disappeared without even a final data burst, as if they had never existed. These were not the signs of a dormant enemy. These were the drumbeats of something rising. The Black Legion had never been known for patience, but Abaddon is no mere warlord. He is a tactician who wields time as a weapon. Yet during this period, the Eye echoed with movements too vast and chaotic to be mere internal strife. Vast warp storms like the Maelstrom's bastard kin bloomed without warning, then vanished just as quickly. Whole daemon worlds shifted position in unholy stellar alignments. The star charts used by traitor Navas in the service of chaos had to be rewritten several times, as if the Eye itself was changing in preparation or reaction to something monumental. Even more chilling were the chants of the word-bearers and the portents recorded by renegade sorcerers. They spoke of the path denied, of the fire drowned before its first spark. The Alpha Legion, ever cryptic, withdrew cells from several key sectors, leaving only empty strongholds and dead agents with eyes scoured clean. The Night Lords, veterans of fear and atrocity, began whispering of the scream that shattered memory. These were the acts of legions reacting to an event, not preparing for one. The warp was mourning something or celebrating a secret victory. And what of the Imperium? Segmentum Obscurus, always braced for the next hellish eruption from the Eye, experienced what some historians have ironically dubbed the false peace. A lull in major chaos activity, despite rising warp instability, led to a misguided belief that Abaddon had entered a phase of stasis or defeat. Some within the Ordo Hereticus proposed this as evidence that the traitor Warmaster had overreached in his prior crusade and now lacked the strength for another assault. But others, older inquisitors who had faced the abyss and returned, urged caution. When the Eye grows still, wrote Inquisitor Garyon Vox, it is not sleeping, it is staring, and perhaps it was. Perhaps the Eye of Terror, so often treated as a source of evil without will, was itself bracing, reacting to something it could neither contain nor defy. The psychic space around it grew brittle. Astropaths suffered inexplicable seizures when routing communications near the Cadian Gate. In one particularly infamous event, the entire Choir Primus aboard the battleship Indomitable Vow was found dead, blood pouring from their mouths after attempting to scry the eye. Their final message was a single phrase, burned into a console screen by unknown means. It screams in silence. So the stage was set, or perhaps already broken. The Eye of Terror was restless, not in fury but in confusion, in dissonance, as if even the great warp rift could not fully hold what it had seen or what had been taken from it. And in that turmoil, one can begin to see the shadow of something greater, a crusade that came and went like a storm in reverse, tearing through reality, leaving behind not scars but blankness. A war that wounded time itself. They are called ghost fleets, convoys of imperial warships that never returned, vanished without trace, presumed lost in the roiling tides of the warp. But sometimes decades or even centuries later, they emerge. Not through warp corridors or stable routes, but in impossible bursts of presence, phasing into real space with hulls fractured, Vox systems howling incoherently, and their crews reduced to withered husks or raving lunatics. What few fragments can be recovered from these derelict vessels are often dismissed by the Administratum as tainted data. But among the ranks of the Inquisition, particularly those who monitor temporal anomalies, these ships are known as proof, damning and undeniable, of wars waged outside of known history. One such vessel was the Glory of Celestine, a Voss-pattern cruiser declared lost in a warp jump from the Themios subsector during what should have been a routine patrol. 300 years later, it reappeared in the outer reaches of the Atlion Drift, its power core drained, life support systems dead. Every corridor was scorched by last fire and explosive residue. Melted icons of the Aquila were found piled in what looked like makeshift barricades. In the central chapel, a massive sigil of the Eye of Horus had been carved into the deck plating, but not by Chaos hands. The cuts were erratic, panicked, made by Imperial tools. The black box recovered from the bridge broadcast a corrupted, looping Vox recording. We broke their shape, but not their will. The sky burned backwards. It wasn't Abaddon, it wasn't him. And the Glory of Celestine is not alone. Across Segmentum Obscurus, and even deeper into Ultima, other ships have emerged bearing similar stories. Tales of impossible engagements, of enemies cloaked in Black Legion livery, but wielding technologies or sorceries unknown even among the traitor legions. Some speak of battles where the stars bled light in reverse, where time flickered like a dying lumen. Fragmented astropathic logs recovered from these vessels are more disturbing still. Psychic impressions of entire sectors falling silent, not through conquest but through erasure. They fell, and we forgot, reads one entry attributed to an astropath from the ship Voidhim. We forgot them while they screamed. None of these fleets appear on any Imperial Crusade deployment lists. None were part of known defense operations against the Eye. Yet their markings, deployment logs, and battle damage suggest engagements on a scale far beyond pirate activity or localized chaos incursions. In fact, some show damage from weapon systems not seen since the Heresy, and in at least one case, signatures reminiscent of Dark Age human technology. Some within the Ordo Chronos argue these ghost fleets may be evidence of an erased conflict. A temporal incursion so vast it bent the warp and real space into a non-linear loop. A battle that occurred, was lost, and was then struck from the sequence of time itself by forces unknown. Whether this was a deliberate act of memory suppression or a consequence of an esoteric warp weapon remains bitterly debated. But the ghost fleets have become a superstition among Imperial voidfarers. Ships lost near the Eye of Terror are said to carry the Whispering Mark, and when they reappear, they bring not tales of glory, but a hunger for silence. Many inquisitorial kill teams sent to investigate such wrecks never return, and those who do are often executed immediately for signs of possession or corruption. But even in death, they sometimes leave fragments behind, scribbled prayers, garbled voxes, sketches etched into the walls of their cells. Again and again the same phrases appear: Black Crusade, not Addon, not numbered, buried in blood. If a crusade occurred and these ghost fleets are its broken survivors, then the war was unlike any other. These were not veterans singing of valor. These were husks, hollowed by an experience that should not have happened, or perhaps happened too many times. A war repeating across folds of time, collapsing under its own weight until the universe itself rejected it, until reality, in an act of mercy or fear, chose to forget. Cadia remembers everything, Or so the myth goes. The fortress world stands sentinel at the mouth of the Eye of Terror, its soil stained with the blood of billions, its stones echoing with the thunder of constant war. If any place in the Imperium should recall the full fury of Abaddon's Black Crusades, it is Cadia. And yet, when one searches through the ancient data tombs beneath Khazar Kraf, when one decrypts the sealed records of the Cadian High Command, there is a strange, chilling silence. No mention of an 11th Crusade. No alerts, no campaign reports, no post-conflict assessments. It is as if the entire segment of history simply does not exist. This silence is not benign. It is calculated. Cadian records are obsessively maintained. Generations of drill abbots and log scribes have engraved every war, every training maneuver, every minor incursion into a continuous thread of martial legacy. But amid this iron-bound chain of memory lies a missing link. A gap so precisely stitched over that only those who look too closely, historians, data archaeologists, heretics, even notice the missing span of time. A 3-year void during which Cadia neither dispatched forces nor received reinforcement reports from dozens of its watchworlds. Veteran officers from that era are either dead under suspicious circumstances or have gone to ground, unreachable even by the Inquisition. Those few who survived long enough to be questioned under the light of the Emperor's will speak only in riddles. Colonel Anvar Drek, once decorated for valor in the defense of Eland's Reach, was found catatonic in his hab following a debriefing. Etched into the walls of his quarters, scrawled in his own blood, were the words, "Cadia held, but not here, not now." There is speculation among rogue archivists that a massive psi-purge occurred on Cadia following an event of unknown scale, a mind burn, they call it, a forbidden mass ritual wherein sanctioned psychers are used to erase collective memory by overwhelming the noospheric archives and psychic echoes of a population. Such things are not spoken of in loyal halls, but the Ordo Malleus maintains references to similar events in times of demonic incursion. If the 11th Crusade did strike Cadia, perhaps it was not with fire and steel, but with truth, a truth too terrible for the fortress to survive intact. And what of the Cadian Schola archives? Here the trail is even stranger. One would expect military scholums to be bastions of strict chronology. Yet there are no drills referencing the 11th Crusade. Recruits memorize the battles of the 10th and the horror of the 12th with religious precision, but in between there is a ritual pause, as though reciting a litany missing a sacred verse. When questioned, drill sergeants grow agitated, defensive. Some claim the verse was removed for doctrinal purity. Others refuse to answer at all. There are whispers that the Cadian pylons, ancient structures predating the Imperium itself, reacted violently during the theorized timeline. Sensor ghosts recorded tremors of unknown energy patterns. One report, long suppressed, tells of a pylon emitting a low-frequency howl that drove an entire Khazar into suicidal madness. The Adeptus Mechanicus team sent to investigate were reportedly killed by environmental instability, but those who reviewed the data say it was more like a coordinated assault from within. None of this is conclusive, but it paints a picture far more terrifying than the void of ignorance. It suggests complicity. That the defenders of Cadia did not simply fail to record an invasion, but were compelled to forget it, not by cowardice, but by necessity. Whatever the 11th Crusade brought to the gates of Cadia, it was not a conventional war. It was a contagion of knowing, a revelation so deadly it had to be excised from thought itself. And Cadia, proud Cadia, obeyed. Abaddon the Despoiler is not a madman, though many within the Imperium brand him as such. A raving heir to a fallen war master, those who have truly studied his crusades know better. He is patient, calculating, and ruthlessly intelligent. Across 13 great offensives, he has struck at the Imperium's strength and soul with relentless precision. And that very pattern of destruction is what makes the silence around the 11th Crusade all the more disturbing. Because when one maps the Crusades chronologically, a deliberate rhythm emerges. Each crusade escalating in complexity, brutality, and ambition. The 10th was an apocalyptic siege of strategic resources. The 12th set the stage for the fall of Cadia. So what role did the 11th play? What wound was it meant to inflict? And why was it cut from the dance? Each of Abaddon's crusades, far from being random outbreaks of violence, targeted specific arteries of the Imperium. be it military bastions, psychic infrastructure, or relics of the heresy. The Fourth Crusade shattered the Black Templar's spiritual morale. The Seventh introduced the Blackstone fortresses to galactic warfare. The 13th ripped open the Cadian Gate. The 11th, then, should have been the fulcrum between preparation and annihilation. And if it vanished, the implication is terrifying. It either failed in such a catastrophic fashion that it demanded obliteration, or it succeeded in a way too terrible to record. Among the few surviving strategic codices from the Chaos side, relics of intercepted transmissions, captured demons, or mind-scoured traitor marines, there is a trace of something known only as the Sorrowing Wound. A phrase with no context, no battle plan, no victory hymn. Just a name. And it appears precisely where one would expect references to a Black Crusade. Some inquisitors believe this may be the true designation of the 11th Crusade, or at least the code name used by Abaddon and his inner circle. But what kind of target would merit such a name? A sorrowing wound implies something deeply personal, something emotional, not simply tactical. It has led some heretical historians to posit that the 11th Crusade may have been directed not at territory or power, but at legacy. A symbolic act of violence aimed at the emperor himself, or worse, at the fractured memory of Horus. Imagine for a moment that Abaddon sought not merely to raise but to erase, to undo a piece of the galaxy's soul. Some even speculate that the target was a hidden bastion of the Emperor's own gene seed archives, a place where the original Primarch templates were preserved. A world never spoken of, possibly hidden by the Sigillites' own hands. If such a place existed, and if the 11th Crusade struck it, the consequences would be more than physical. The warp reverberations could be so vast, so reality-breaking, that memory itself would fray. Entire timelines might become unspeakable, and so the war would vanish, not because of a cover-up, but because reality could no longer contain the truth. There's also the disturbing possibility that the 11th Crusade was not waged by Abaddon, but through him, as a conduit, not a commander. Perhaps he opened a gate that let something else through, an entity or force so foreign even the Chaos gods hesitated to name it. Some Black Legion warbands have been found with murals etched into their dread-clad walls, showing Abaddon flanked by towering figures with masks instead of faces, silent things bearing symbols older than the Eye of Terror. If these are to be believed, then the 11th was a summoning, not a crusade, a breach that invited something into our galaxy which could not be stopped, only forgotten. Why then did Abaddon continue his crusades afterward? If the 11th ended in such unknowable devastation, why did the 12th resume the war as if nothing had occurred? Perhaps the War Master, too, does not remember. Perhaps that was the cost. To summon the storm, one must surrender to it. And when it passed, it left behind only silence and the need to continue, even if the path was lost. This is why the 11th Crusade haunts strategists and seers alike. Because it does not fit. Because its absence is not a hole in a pattern, it is a scar across the shape of war itself. And perhaps that was always the intent. Not to win, not to destroy, but to wound the very narrative of reality and bleed it until history could no longer heal. Under a blood-red sky choked with warp storms, Kratos Reach once stood defiant. A fortified system on the outer edge of Segmentum Obscurus, it was a jewel of the Imperium's early reconquest efforts during the Nova Terran Crusades, a bastion of Enlightenment-era ambition, home to both Astra Militarum war colleges and an extensive Librarius extension maintained jointly by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica and a rare sanctioned sect of the Ordo Xenos. It was a place of knowledge and defense designed not just to hold against the warp, but to study it. That was its blessing. And that, inevitably, was its doom. Today, Kratos Reach appears on no chart. Where once 5 inhabited planets and 3 orbital fortress rings glittered in harmony, now there is only blackness, a region scrubbed from auspex and memory alike, enveloped by a thin but unbreakable cloud of warp interference. Even the stars beyond it seem wrong, bent, as though the void itself forgets what light once passed through it. Navigators trained in that region suffer seizures when attempting to peer into the Reach's former location. The Adeptus Mechanicus, once eager to explore its potent data crypts, have labeled the sector Lex Obscura, the dark sin, and sealed its records behind quintuple cognitive locks. But remnants remain. The last known transmission from Kratos Reach came from Orbital Bastion 4, a sprawling defense platform stationed above the shrine world of Aradel. In its final broadcast, relayed through emergency side channel only, a scream of pure static burst forth for 3 hours. No voices, no data, no recognizable signal forms, just noise. Until at the very end, a voice cut through. We die unremembered. We bleed into silence. No ship that attempted recovery ever returned. The salvage frigate Resolute Mercy, sent decades later under the auspices of Inquisitor Leorn of the Ordo Malleus, emerged from the Reach mad and damaged, its bridge crew fused into their consoles by unknown energy signatures. The words, "It was the 11th," were etched into every surface of the Vox pit, over and over, down to the teeth of the dead captain. Theories abound. Some believe the Reach was used as a test site, a battleground for an experimental chaos weapon of metaphysical effect. Others argue it was the site of a devastating internal betrayal, where a loyalist fleet turned upon itself under some new form of mind-warping influence. But those who know the deeper layers of the Crusade patterns see something else. The Reach lies in a region whose warp tides align closely with a network of ancient, pre-imperial webway breach points. Its significance as a potential key to intersegmentum travel was being rediscovered at the time of its fall. If Abaddon struck here, it may have been to sever something foundational, not just a route, but a principle of connection. To sever the Imperium from a truth it didn't know it possessed. Some heretic scribes have reconstructed maps of Kratos Reach before its fall using salvaged Mechanicus data, and what they show is chilling. Several planets bore uncanny similarities to lost colonies of the dark age of technology, with orbital relics containing libraries that had yet to be breached. There are even references to an artificial intelligence remnant, not active, but stored, watched, protected. A ghost from the Men of Iron, perhaps, sealed by oath and fear. Could the 11th Crusade have been launched not to destroy, but to retrieve? Even more terrifying is the implication from some fractured data logs retrieved from deep void auger nets around the region. They speak of entities appearing in the system that bore no warp signature. Beings that moved not through real space or warp space, but something else. Like light bleeding from a second eye, one log says. These visitors did not speak. They did not war. They simply erased. They touched things, and those things ceased to have history. What if Kratos Reach was the crucible of something far beyond chaos? A proving ground for a weapon of deletion, or worse, a proving ground for a kind of existential treason. Something that didn't want to kill the Imperium, but to unwrite it. To pull it, strand by strand, from the warp's memory, from mankind's soul, until even its defenders no longer remembered what they had failed to save. Kratos Reach is gone, but its echo endures, in haunted transmissions, in the dreams of astropaths, in the screams of cogitators that sometimes break protocol to whisper, the 11th is watching. And in that echo is the shape of a war not lost, but abolished. There are dead who do not rest. Across the Imperium, in haunted void ships and crumbling cathedrals, the echoes of war are common, but some echoes do not match any known event. Some cries of the fallen do not appear in any records, and their origins are denied even by the warp. These are the revenants of the unremembered, the victims, it is whispered, of the 11th Black Crusade. In the sector surrounding the Eye of Terror, mass hauntings have grown increasingly common over the millennia. Entire imperial bastions have fallen silent overnight, only for relief forces to find them deserted, save for voices still murmuring in the walls. Some reports speak of ghostly guardsmen marching in spectral columns at midnight, eyes vacant, armor blackened by a fire no longer burning. They bear wounds from no known weapons, and they chant a single name, Kratos. The astropaths, of course, know more than they admit. They have always been the Imperium's unwilling archivists of horror. For them, the memories of others are not stories, but storms that crash through their minds unbidden. Since the time most scholars believe the 11th Crusade should have occurred, astropaths across Segmentum Obscurus have recorded recurring nightmares of battles that never were, psychic flashes of planetary bombardments, of massive, indistinct shapes blotting out the stars, of despair so deep it bends light, and always, always there is the same moment, the sudden, wrenching void where memory should be. a silence more violent than any scream. These aren't just individual nightmares. They are shared. Patterns have been detected, recurring psychic impressions in choir conclaves scattered across 100 worlds. Even the Adeptus Astra Telepathica has quietly acknowledged the anomaly, although any attempt to publish studies has resulted in abrupt reassignment or worse. A few brave or foolish psychers have called it the morning pulse, a wave of grief with no origin, a ripple that moves backward through time, shedding memory like ash. And then there are the bodies. Hundreds of tomb worlds across the Imperium are filled with the honored dead. But some graves contain remains that should not be there. Soldiers in non-standard armor, bearing unit insignia that match no existing regiments. On the death world of Verax Minor, an exhumed mass grave revealed skeletons wearing what appeared to be hybridized versions of Cadian and Vostroyan gear, etched with runes that resist even inquisitorial translation. Their genoscans are scrambled, their weapons half-phased into the soil, as if caught mid-teleport. A psychic reading of the site caused 5 astropaths to burst into flames. Their final word was unanimous: forgotten. The ecclesiarchy, desperate to suppress this growing body of evidence, has begun declaring these sites blasphemous anomalies, or heretic tombs. But in their haste to conceal, they only feed the fear, because the dead are not staying dead. In sectors near the eye, there are reports of dreams that become real. Visions of warriors with blank faces emerging from the shadows, walking through walls, shedding blood that evaporates before it touches the floor. Survivors of such incidents suffer spontaneous memory loss, unable to recall the last hour, day, or week. It's as if contact with these revenants peels away more than time. It shreds identity itself. Even the black ships have not escaped untouched. At least 3 ships transporting sanctioned psychers reported mass suicides during passage through warp lanes near the eye, each preceded by a psychic flare that burned out the ship's gellar field momentarily. One such flare was recorded in psychic script across the walls of the chamber housing the master telepath. It read, "We died for a war you cannot name. We scream because we remember." Some whisper that these phenomena are the warp's attempt to correct a paradox. That a war so massive, so traumatic, cannot simply be removed without consequence. And the ghosts, these half-remembered, fragmentary dead, are the backlash. Memory itself, wounded and struggling, bleeds out in the form of revenants. Not hauntings, but memory leaks. Psychic hemorrhages from a past forcibly erased. And perhaps that is the cruelest truth of all. That in a galaxy where martyrdom is sacred, where the name of every lost soul is etched into monuments and prayer, these dead are denied remembrance. They fought, they died, they won, or perhaps they lost so completely their defeat could not be spoken. But no one remembers, no one mourns. Except the warp. The Black Legion does not forget. Their hatred is carved into every bolt shell, every rune-inscribed pauldron, every jagged blade forged in the eye's forges. They are vengeance incarnate, and every crusade is both a strike and a sermon, a declaration that Horus lives through Abaddon, and the galaxy must burn for what was denied them. Yet even among these zealots, there is a silence, a gap, a war unspoken. The 11th Black Crusade, if it existed, has left no song, no tale, no scar upon the minds of the traitor legions. That, more than anything, terrifies the Inquisition. Captured Black Legionnaires, broken upon the racks of pain engines, recount with fervor the fires of Scalathrax, the storming of Lex Obscura, the desecration of Elysium Prime. But when interrogators press them on events in the time between the 10th and 12th Crusades, their reactions shift. Confusion, anger, silence. Some fall into trances, their voices replaced by a hissing static that sears vox recorders. One whispered a phrase in a dialect not spoken since the Siege of Terra. He took it back, even from us. It's not just the lack of memory, it's the fear around that void. Among the word-bearers and the Night Lords, stories persist of a war the despoiler refuses to name. Of battlefields where even the warp screamed, of brother warriors who marched into a conflict from which not only they, but their identities did not return. A fractured verse, often repeated by warpsmiths gone half-mad, describes it thus: "One crusade for the gods, one crusade for the wound, one crusade for silence." The inner circles of the Black Legion, Abaddon's chosen, are near impossible to interrogate, but fragmentary data from Daemon scrying rituals and soulbound cogitator drones reveal a curious pattern. Their personal records, some spanning back to the Great Heresy, show regular documentation of Abaddon's campaigns, except for a missing segment. Exactly 3 years. In each case, this gap is smoothed over as if it never mattered. But those gaps lie directly between two entries: the aftermath of the 10th Crusade and preparations for the 12th. As if something vital, something sacred or traumatic, had been carved out. Even the warbands that have splintered from Abaddon, fractious and proud, speak little of that era. When pressed, they change the subject. One exiled sorcerer, Lord of the Sons of the Pyre, screamed himself to death in his warpbinder cell when asked what occurred during the 11th. His final words, channeled through blood-soaked lips, were, "We screamed for him, and he screamed back, and then he was gone." What power could silence the Black Legion? What act could erase itself not only from Imperial memory, but from the vainglorious legacy of chaos itself? Some suggest that the 11th Crusade was not led by Abaddon at all, or worse, that it was led by a false Abaddon, a doppelganger conjured by Tzeentchian trickery, or an avatar gone rogue. A crusade of shadows, misremembered by design, perhaps even turned upon itself. Others believe the Black Legion encountered something in the warp so antithetical to their nature that it broke them, not physically, but spiritually. A cosmic negation of chaos, a void of belief so pure it unmade their purpose. More radical still is the theory that Abaddon did remember and chose to forget. That the Crusade's outcome was so deeply compromising, so heretical to the cause of vengeance, that he demanded silence. That he performed a ritual, aided by his sorcerers and dark gods, to scour the event from his own legion's minds. To destroy not the enemy, but the truth. If true, then the 11th Black Crusade represents the greatest threat to chaos ever encountered. Not because it killed them, but because it forced them to hide. Chaos revels in madness, in contradiction, in trauma. But it does not forget. That is its strength, and perhaps its curse. For the Black Legion to forget is to deny a piece of its own soul. Which means that somewhere, buried deep in the warp or in the minds of the lost, the truth festers. It may one day return, and when it does, the Black Legion may not survive the memory. They say the Eldari see all things, that their farseers walk threads of fate woven through endless permutations of what might be, what was, and what must never be. Among the craft worlds, time is not a river, but a fractal, a labyrinth of consequence and cost. And yet, even the most ancient of their seers speak with dread of a blind spot in the skein, a moment where all futures collapse into silence. They do not name it. They do not draw it. But among those who dare to whisper, it is known as the wound without form, a hole in the prophecy where the 11th Black Crusade once bled. Among the Bealtan, aggressive and proud, the warlock conclaves have long mapped imperial movements in order to predict points of fracture. During one such session centuries ago, the rune for Black Crusade appeared inverted on the Wraithbone slab, surrounded by glyphs meaning shadow, grief, and echo. The lead warlock, Aerith Teal, suffered spontaneous soul drain during the session. Her soulstone cracked. No cause was ever found. Her last words were recorded by her spirit seer. "We saw it, and now we don't. That is the danger." The Inari, with their strange new faith in death as a path to rebirth, have shown peculiar reverence toward the theorized time of the 11th Crusade. Yvraine herself, in one rare discourse with Drakari dissidents, mentioned a war that was not and should not be, and yet left scars on the shape of endings. Some of her inner circle bear talismans made from human bone, etched with the numeral 11 in ancient Terran script. They do not explain why. Even among the Harlequins, who treat the fates of mortals as drama, as tragedy, there is no laughter around this tale. In the Black Library's outermost vaults, there exists a webway fragment designated the Unplayable Mask. Its contents are unknown, but its existence is confirmed by multiple rogue inquisitorial agents. What little is known comes from a single mad solitaire encountered by the Ordo Xenos. He danced a ballet that ended with a gesture of erasure, drawing an invisible line across his own face, then vanishing into nothing. A servant of Segurak, silenced by dread, it chills the blood. Some Exodite seers claim the 11th Crusade was seen, once, A timeline that should have blossomed into a cataclysm, but was pruned by forces even the old ones never dared name. A pantheon that predates the warp gods, perhaps, or a cosmic intelligence that moves not through time, but through remembrance itself. In their words, it was a lie so profound, reality rewrote its own language to forget it. But not all Eldari turn away. Among the dark spires of Kamara, a single whisper circulates through the cabals and witch cults. The Path of 13 holds only 12 steps. It is a mocking reference to imperial history, but it betrays knowledge deeper than taught. Some archons speak of a deal once struck with something from beyond the webway, a thing that asked for nothing but the silence of one moment. A favor for a favor, and in return, the 11th Crusade ended. The price, they say, is yet unpaid. One captured homunculus, when pressed by inquisitorial biomancers, revealed a grotesque sculpture, a tangled amalgam of bone, wraithbone, and flayed psychic tissue. Within it, a pulsing knot of energy in constant flux. It emits no warp signature, no life signs, but it has been heard to whisper in multiple tongues. I was war. I was the truth. You are the lie. There are no records among the Eldari, no painted domes, no saga poems, no runic glyphs etched into infinity circuits. And yet there are the scars, the lost seers, the mad dancers, the prayers to silence. It is as if the 11th Black Crusade was a stone thrown into a reflection, ripples visible only in distortion, never in the water itself. Perhaps the Eldari know, perhaps they fear knowing more. Or perhaps they, too, were wounded, not by blade or fire, but by the deletion of a future they could not allow. A memory sacrificed to preserve a different path. A sorrow buried so deeply it echoes even now in the bones of a dying race. The Inquisition is not a single blade. It is a cathedral of knives, each pointed in a different direction. Within its myriad ordos and clandestine arms, there exists one circle so secretive it appears on no record, spoken of only in deathbed confessions and encrypted marginalia, the Ninth Watch. Some claim it is a myth, others a deterrent fabricated to scare ambitious interrogators. But those who have glimpsed its shadow know the truth. The Ninth Watch exists, and its purpose is singular: to contain events that should never have happened. Unlike the Ordo Chronos, which concerns itself with paradox and time fracture, the Ninth Watch addresses conceptual threats, occurrences that wound reality not through temporal displacement, but through the sheer impossibility of their existence. The 11th Black Crusade, if it ever transpired, would fall squarely within their purview. The first confirmed mention of the Ninth Watch comes from a fragmentary message discovered in the ruins of an obliterated astropathic relay on Darion's Rest. The message, encoded in a cipher obsolete since M32, read, "Memory breach expanding, engaging Ninth Protocol, initiate total obscurity, subject Black Crusade, 11th. Shortly thereafter, the entire orbital vanished in a warp implosion. No survivors. Inquisitor Hale Stren, known for his unorthodox pursuits into metaphysical anomalies, disappeared during his investigation into a string of psychic suicides linked to ghost fleets. His final report, recovered from a sealed dread vault, contained one phrase: "The Ninth Watch walks, and when they do, history weeps." He spoke of a black archive hidden beneath the Leith Vault on Terra, protected not by servitors or purity fields, but by blank space. A zone of negative cognition where memory fails and logic dissolves. A place where even the Emperor's Tarot returns only inverted cards. The Ninth Watch does not fight wars. It does not issue edicts. It performs operations known as dissonant excisions, purges not of heresy, but of knowledge. Entire populations can be made to forget with the right combination of psychic frequency and mimetic collapse. Libraries can be stripped of entries. Even cogitators can be rendered oblivious with logic paradoxes too dense for recovery. They do not kill the body. They kill the story. Some believe the Ninth Watch intervened during the 11th Crusade, not to protect the Imperium, but to protect reality. That what Abaddon unleashed, or became, threatened not merely the balance of power, but the structure of memory itself. Perhaps he attempted a form of war so conceptually malignant that it began to alter causality. If the Black Crusade was a weapon, the Ninth Watch was the scalpel that cut it from time. Witnesses to such events, those rare enough to survive, are either obliterated or hollowed. Hollowing is a process more feared than death. Victims are stripped of name, purpose, context. They live, but they are not themselves. They become ghosts in human skin, often weeping for reasons they cannot explain. It is whispered that entire convents of these hallowed reside in the labyrinth beneath Titan, tended by Grey Knights who no longer take communion. Watching, remembering nothing. Even within the Inquisition, knowledge of the Ninth Watch is taboo. Mentioning it in a report can result in immediate audit or disappearance. Those who probe too deeply into the lost years of the 11th Crusade often find their notes shredded by cogitator virus bearing the signature Semper Oblitus, always forgotten. But there are signs, if you know where to look. In the deepest vaults of the Ordo Malleus, beneath black steel shields layered with sanctified blood, there lies a sealed stasis tomb marked only with a numeral Exime. It is said to contain a fragment of something, not a relic but a moment. A preserved scream, a memory scream so potent it is stored in active suppression. Those who pass near it dream of a war they never fought, of comrades whose names they do not know, and of a falling sky full of eyes. The Ninth Watch may have buried the 11th Black Crusade, but in doing so, they wounded the warp. And wounds bleed. Perhaps their silence was mercy, or perhaps it was treason. The kind only history can judge, if history is ever allowed to remember. It began with the screams of the forges, not the mechanical shrieks of grinding servitors or the rhythmic clang of smith hammer on ceramite. These were deeper sounds, as if the soul of the forge itself was in pain. On Varnax Theta, a dark mechanicum forge world on the fringes of the eye, machines wept molten blood. Data looms erupted in frenzied binary, repeating impossible coordinates and untranslatable code phrases. Crusade 11 subsum. Magos Dominus or Venthrall was recorded declaring, "We build for a war we cannot name. The blueprints are in our dreams." The forges of chaos operate under strange logic, often dictated by demon-bound schematics or prophetic machine souls. But during the span many now linked to the 11th Black Crusade, an anomalous surge occurred across half a dozen known heretic enclaves. Resources were drawn from distant worlds with no stated project. Entire manufactorum sectors were repurposed seemingly overnight to fabricate weapons of unknown function. Blades that sang in the warp, bolters that fired silence instead of shells, armor that warped the very perception of those who looked upon it. Then it stopped, not gradually, not with the fading of a campaign. One day, the orders ceased. The forges went dark. The machine spirits, or whatever profane equivalents animated them, fell mute. Some entire facilities exploded in chain reactions, as if the purpose of their creation had become not only obsolete, but heretical even to their own creators. One such forge, designated Ophion Black, was believed to have been constructed upon a fallen fragment of a blackstone fortress. Its archives, partially recovered by a daring and suicidal explorator mission, revealed plans for a weapon system classified as reflexive anti-myth. No context, no description, only a fragmentary log. Deploy against the forgotten, strike before the lie becomes real. The Imperium did not escape unscathed. During a covert raid on an Arch Mechanicus rumored to have defected to Chaos, Inquisitor Magos, Iriel Marn, retrieved what is now known as the Null Codex. Bound in adamant-wrapped flesh and surrounded by an active null field, the Codex contains schematics for a weapon interface that links directly to the user's soul, bypassing cognitive input. It is unclear whether this device was created to fight the 11th Crusade or was salvaged from it. More disturbing are the fragmentary blueprints found scattered across the galaxy, often in derelict ships or corrupted data stacks hidden in cogitator ruins. They suggest a convergence of technological ideologies that should never coexist. Human tech fused with Necron logic architecture. Eldar synodes embedded in machine frameworks. Even signs of what some Mechanicus radicals claim might be pre-heresy Imperial AI. If the Dark Mechanicum forged weapons for the 11th Crusade, they did so using designs older than the Imperium, or worse, stolen from futures that never came to pass. And these weapons now lie dormant. There are vaults, known only to the highest ranks of the Inquisition and the tech priests of Mars, that hold examples of these relics. They are inert, their power gone, their purpose lost. But those who have touched them report visions, not of past glories or forged cathedral hymns, but of battles never fought, of screaming planets, of comrades with empty faces. One tech priest, after interfacing with a temporal bifurcator, gouged out his own data ports and whispered, "It was the 11th. We made it real. That was the sin." Some say the reason the Dark Mechanicum will not speak of this period is not shame, but awe, that they created weapons too perfect, too final. Weapons that did not merely destroy but rewrote, tools that removed things from the warp, from time, from the machine god's perception. And when the 11th Crusade ended, or was ended, these relics became too dangerous to use again, or perhaps even to remember. The Forge is memory made matter. To forget what you built is to lose a part of yourself. And yet, in this case, forget they did. Deliberately, perhaps. Fearfully, certainly. And that silence is louder than any foundry's roar. The High Lords of Terra do not speak of failure. They do not speak of doubt, nor fear, nor compromise. To rule the Imperium is to embody certainty in the face of a universe designed to unmake it. Yet, in the vaults beneath the Senatorum Imperialis, there are decision chambers built not for strategy, but for silence. Places where things are not debated, but entombed. And it is in these vaults, if the forbidden texts are to be believed, that the 11th Black Crusade was buried. Not by the fires of war, but by consensus. Not all wars are meant to be remembered. Some must be excised, not from archives, but from the soul of a people. What kind of truth could drive the Imperium to such extremes? What terror could shake the High Lords into collusion with those they call heretics and monsters? The answer may lie in a concept so abominable that even the Ordo Malleus lacks words for it: ontological compromise. The idea that the 11th Crusade struck not at planets or fortresses, but at the Imperium's self-definition. That it exposed a flaw in the very mythos of mankind, revealing the Emperor's dream as incomplete, unstable, or false. Whispers in the Librarium Sanctus of Terra speak of a conclave of 12, representatives from the Inquisition, the Mechanicus, the Ecclesiarchy, and even the Eldar. They met only once, in absolute secrecy. The result was a doctrine not recorded in any archive: Lex Obscura. It authorized the use of every known tool of memory suppression, reality redaction, and historiographic corruption to remove the 11th Crusade from all existence. The logic was brutal. Better to lose one war than to lose the coherence of the entire Imperium. The Adeptus Administratum deployed redactors known as the Null Clerks, whose task was not just to delete, but to unwrite. They didn't burn data, they rewrote it into banality. War zones were reclassified as plague outbreaks. Heroic deaths became administrative errors. Monuments were subtly redesigned to exclude the unmentionable dead. Even picked captures were altered, faces blurred by supposedly malfunctioning logic engines. Perhaps the most horrifying aspect was the silence imposed on the survivors. Those who had fought and lived were sequestered, psychically cleansed, or made into servitors. A few, deemed too vital to destroy, were placed into permanent stasis crypts, locked beneath the Imperial Palace itself. There, it is said, they dream endlessly of a battle no one remembers and scream in their sleep. Why such extremes? What did the Imperium gain? Some claim that during the 11th Crusade, Abaddon revealed or unleashed a truth that unraveled faith itself. Perhaps it was proof that the Emperor was dead in spirit, or that the warp was no longer a realm of belief but of pure entropy. Perhaps the Crusade pierced into a realm of uncreation, where reality bled away and even the gods recoiled. In the face of that, what hope could doctrine offer? What purpose would the Ecclesiarchy serve? There are forbidden treatises, penned by radical inquisitors now purged, that describe semantic decay, a process by which reality breaks down when language can no longer describe what is happening. They theorize that the 11th Crusade reached such a point that the events became so untranslatable that they poisoned context itself, making memory dangerous, belief fatal. The only option left was redaction. Not cowardice, survival. The cost was immense. Thousands of loyal servants, devout martyrs, unsung heroes, all reduced to footnotes, erased not because they failed, but because they succeeded in a war that was unwinnable. They stared into a truth that broke narrative and came back changed. And that change to the High Lords was more dangerous than any Xenos threat or heretic cult. So the Imperium chose silence. It chose to forget. And in doing so, it chose to preserve its illusion of permanence. The 11th Black Crusade was the price of that illusion. A war so profound, so reality-shattering, that to remember it would be to dismantle the Emperor's domain thought by thought, shrine by shrine. It was not just a decision. It was a sacrifice. And it continues every day in the enforced forgetting of those who still feel the ache of a war they cannot name. There is no monument to the 11th Black Crusade, no hymns sung in its memory, no banners preserved in shrines, no statues of fallen heroes carved into the cathedrals of the Imperium. Yet its echo endures. In the warp's eddies, in the broken timelines of ghost ships, in the haunted eyes of astropaths who dream of battlefields they never studied, it lives on. Not as a tale told, but as a silence that refuses to be filled. Some say the 11th Crusade never happened, that it is a fabrication of heretics and madmen, that Abaddon's path from the 10th to the 12th was uninterrupted. But how then do we explain the gaps in memory, the fragmentary records that loop back on themselves? The war gear etched with dates that match no battle? The hollowed men who scream in forgotten tongues? Perhaps it is better this way. Perhaps the Imperium cannot survive another war. Not in flesh, but in meaning. The 11th Crusade may not have destroyed worlds, but it fractured belief, wounded narrative, and shook the foundations of shared memory. In a galaxy that defines itself by its capacity to remember, what happens when memory is stolen? Maybe that's what the Crusade truly was, a war against memory itself. A strike at the heart of coherence, an act of violence so profound it unstitched causality. And maybe, just maybe, Abaddon won. Not by conquering planets, but by leaving behind a wound that cannot heal. A wound that festers in the corners of every Inquisitor's mind, in the dark whispers of the Mechanicus, in the dread of Farseers who dare not scry certain years. We live in the aftermath of that silence. And yet, even in a galaxy this vast, silence cannot hold forever. Already, the signs return. Weapons waking in vaults, dreams repeating, null zones expanding near warp breaches. One day, someone will dig too deep, remember too clearly, or ask the wrong question under the right stars. And the 11th Crusade, buried in shadow, will rise again, not as a war reborn Barntup, but as a truth too long denied. And when it does, we will have a choice, to bury it once more, or to finally listen to what was screamed across the void. We were there. We bled. We remember. There is a silence that speaks louder than truth, a silence encoded not in words, but in absence. The 11th Black Crusade, erased from chronologies and cauterized from data vaults, may yet leave its mark in the margins. Not through battle reports or statues, but in anomalies. Patterns that do not make sense until viewed with the eye of doubt. These patterns litter the Imperium like the faint scent of ozone after a lightning strike. They are the stains of a conflict the galaxy was made to forget. Consider the Librarium Catina Obscuris, an ancient Skolam library buried beneath the ruins of Elgris Prime, a once-forgotten agri-world annihilated in a cataclysmic warp storm during the supposed span of the 11th Crusade. When archaeoscribes unearthed its remains, they found something chilling. A partially intact data core containing over 2,000 scriptural entries. Every one of them was a transcript of a different campaign, but entry thevs was missing, not corrupted. Not incomplete, simply gone. The script jumps from X to the, with no break, no gap, no notation. The scribes had renumbered history itself. Elsewhere in the Holy Cathedra of Kratos Reach, a mural once thought to depict the horrors of the Age of Apostasy has recently been reinterpreted by a radical ecclesiarchy archivist. Upon deeper inspection, the figures are clad not in the archaic robes of Vandier's age, but in armor closely matching late M41 pattern Cadian carapace, and surrounding them the silhouettes of a massive battle unlike any documented. Yet the mural is incomplete, scarred as if clawed by a force determined to make it forget. These are not isolated. Across Segmentum Obscurus and even beyond into Ultima and Solar, there are relics, murals, psalm plates, and data crystals that seem to reference a war without name. They are always fragmented, often hidden and universally denied. The Mechanicus labels them artifacts of corrupted machine logic. The Ordo Hereticus calls them pseudo-mimetic incursion residues. But among the Astartes, particularly those who wander alone, the Black Shields, the Forgotten, the Cursed, some call them what they are, echoes of the 11th. One such warrior, known only as Brother Marnell, was recovered from a stasis crypt deep within a derelict inquisitorial dreadnought lost in the warp. When awakened, he bore no chapter heraldry, only a numeral scrawled across his chest plate in dried blood. His mind was shattered, His memories fragmented, but he repeated one phrase before dying. We sang the hymn that broke the sky, and it remembered us. Psychic dissonance, temporal bleed, warp inconsistencies. These are the terms used to hide the pattern. But what if the anomalies are not side effects but survivors? Remnants of a war so devastating to reality that it refuses to fully vanish, lingering like a dream half-remembered, a scream trapped behind memory's veil. If so, then the Imperium is not just denying its past, it is actively living alongside its ghost. And what of the other side? If the Black Crusade was buried, were its agents too? Some inquisitorial interrogations of chaos cults, long deemed too delusional to be useful, include references to the Forgotten Host, warbands that returned from battle marked not by chaos blessings but by emptiness. Warriors who claim to have fought under Abaddon's banner, yet were rejected upon return, their war unheard, their glories undone. One warlord, before he was executed by a kill team, carved a symbol into his cell wall, an eye with a line struck through it. The eye denied. More daring still are the whispers from the Black Library. It is said that within one sealed volume, accessible only to the laughing gods most faithful, lies a prophecy in reverse. A tale unwritten, a war not yet happened, described in perfect detail. The 11th Crusade, not as it was, but as it should have been, might have been, or must never be again. If true, this book is not a record, it is a warning. We speak of chaos as a force of entropy, of madness. But what if it can also be used as a blade to cut not bodies, but stories? What if Abaddon, in his pursuit of final vengeance, found a way to attack not merely the Imperium's defenses, but its narrative structure, to rend the truth, to make a chapter of history scream until even the warp could not contain it? Perhaps that is why the silence around the 11th Crusade feels so different from ignorance. It is not void. It is pressure. It is the feeling of something behind a door you do not remember closing, a door that will one day open again, and when it does, it will not bring fire. It will bring memory. Thank you for walking with me through the unspeakable, the unimaginable, and the forgotten. If these stories stir your soul, if the hidden battles of the 41st millennium intrigue you, then subscribe for more forbidden lore, whispered truths, and the echoes of wars that never were. The galaxy is vast, and its memory is broken. Let us mend it, together.